It seems like a propaganda battle right now when it comes to Syria. Welcome into State of Mind. Now listen, if you're tuning in for the first time, no matter how high or far this program goes, you can say that you saw the first one. And if you accidentally just tripped by, I will also include you in that group, to whom I will say, I am honored by your presence. Spread the word. I would appreciate it if you did. I'm looking forward to this project, but I have no time for small talk. We've got a lot going on. I am honored, speaking of honored, by the presence of Bishop Thomas Tobin from the Diocese of Providence tonight. Lots on our agenda when it comes to the bishop. He's got some things locally that I'm sure are still in his craw, but the Pope has kind of stepped out on this Syrian conflict, and I'm most interested in what he has to say about that, and we'll get to it right away. We do this thing called the rundown on this broadcast, so let us find out exactly what it is that is on our plan tonight. As I said at the top, this is a Syrian propaganda battle that is, it's becoming hard to follow, because even Syria's propaganda inside Syria is hard to follow. We'll get to that. Secretary of State John Kerry issues a sarcastic ultimatum this afternoon in London, but it may have stuck with the Russians, and we'll explain. The DMV headline in the Providence Journal this past Sunday was awful tough. Right after Link Chafee said, I'm not running for re-election, and celebrated his success at the DMV. But there might be a silver lining in all of this. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, am I missing faith. You're thinking, okay, the bishop's coming up. Dan's missing his faith. Not that kind of faith. All right, let's break it down a little bit. So, we have this thing called the Syrian crisis, and we have all sorts of propaganda going on back and forth, and it continued when Charlie Rose snatched this coup, an interview with President Assad, and he's doing this whole dance as to whether or not they have chemical weapons or not. Now remember this as you're watching.
I will tell you very simply, present what you have as evidence to the public. Be transparent.
And if he does?
If he does.
If he presents that evidence?
This is where you can discuss the evidence, but he doesn't have. He didn't present it because he doesn't have. Kerry doesn't have. No one in your administration have. If they had it, they would have presented it to you as media for the first day.
They have presented it to the Congress.
Nothing.
They
Nothing
have
was
shown
presented.
the Congress what they have and the evidence they have from satellites, intercepted messages, and the like.
Nothing presented. Nothing has been presented so far.
They have presented it to the Congress, sir.
You're a reporter. Get this evidences and show it to the public in your country.
Now you got to see the Charlie Rose interview in its entirety to get context, and I haven't yet. But you know, denying what? The existence of the chemical weapons, his ownership of the chemical weapons, who fired off the chemical weapons. Hold on to that thought, because it gets more interesting. So John Kerry, our former junior senator in Massachusetts and now Secretary of State, he became senior senator, of course, when Senator Kennedy passed, but the details. The Secretary of State is in London, and he's being peppered with questions about this. Remember, Parliament said no to any kind of missile attack, and he offers this offhanded, kind of sarcastic thought. Listen.
Sure, he could turn over every single bit of his chemical weapons to the international community in the next week. Turn it over, all of it, without delay, and allow a full and total accounting for that. But he isn't about to do it, and it can't be done, obviously.
Wait a second. That's not what one of the diplomats very high level in the Russian government thought. Russia seizes on this commentary and says, you know what, son of a gun, maybe this is a way out of this deal. Why don't we get an international solution and have an international custody for these chemical weapons in Syria? Okay? Well, that's followed by his counterpart in Syria, not Assad, but a guy who works for him, reportedly and allegedly loyal to him, who says, son of a gun, I could have had a V8. Why don't we do that? That would be smart. We'll give the chemical weapons to an international control, and you won't bomb us, United States of America. Which is kind of interesting, and I'm sure we'll have the ears of Congress all perked up as they look for a way not to support this notion of bombing Syria. But wait a second, tie back to Assad with Charlie Rose. Assad told Charlie Rose he don't know nothing about chemical weapons, but his report is all about to give them to the international community. So it's hard to follow the propaganda, isn't it? The bottom line here is the president is doing the anchor circuit this evening, and he's trying to convince, I think, he's trying to convince Washington that they ought to go with him. And of course, tomorrow night at 9 o'clock, he'll have an Oval Office presentation to try to close the deal. I don't think his heart's in it. I really don't. And we'll talk more about that with the bishop and other things this evening. On a kind of a follow-up from last week note, the DMV headline, did you see this in the Providence Journal? Real quick. Providence Journal headline, DMV's stalled computer project. This is a killer. $6.7 million over budget. Original cost $8.8 million. Cost as of January 2013, $15.5 million. 4 years past deadline. The project launched in 2006. It was supposed to be done in 2010, and now it's destined for completion in 2014. 23,000 hours wasted. As a result, they had to pay the contractor over $1 million because they were fiddling and diddling around with nothing to do because they didn't get the inputs that they needed to fix what really is all the data entry at the DMV. Now, that's not fair because Link Chafee, did you see him last week? He was running around the DMV before he announced that he was going to take a pass on re-election. And one of the things that he touted was his excellent record at the DMV. So when he woke up Sunday morning and looked at the Journal headline, he must have had a little bit of agita or difficulty swallowing his Wheaties. There's a silver lining in this, Governor. You have lessened the timeline at the DMV. You've done a wonderful job with that. Listen, stay focused. This is whole big overrun and 2-year project that you got to get done to really finish off the project at the DMV. And I would ask as a constituent and as an analyst that you just stay focused on that. Don't do anything else. Don't offer us any other ideas. Don't give us any other programs. Stay completely focused on the DMV because at the end of the day, that's your legacy. And we'll be happy for it. Final thought. Did you see Sunday Night Football last night? Faith Hill, gone. 6 years of the best show open you'd ever want to see. I used to crank it up. My wife would be, "Will you turn that down?" And they bring Carrie Underwood in. All I want to say is, Carrie, you did great on Idol, but you are no Faith Hill. And all I have to say to Faith Hill is, please come back. Speaking of faith, he's got plenty of it to offer. We all need it. The bishop on Syria and a whole bunch more. Stay with us. So here is Pope Francis in an environment of prayer, and this one at the Vatican is all about what's happening in Syria. And I thought that was pretty profound last week, and I thought to myself, heck, you know, on night one of Dan Yorke's State of Mind, it'd be an honor to have His Excellency the Bishop anyway, but this conversation I think is incredibly timely. First, welcome. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Dan. I'm very, very honored to be your first guest on your new program, and good luck. I hope this all goes well for you.
Well, it's cool. You say a prayer for me too, right?
I can do that as well.
Maybe not here, but a little bit later. You get a blessing. We always expect the Pope to weigh in on international matters, but in this particular case, I think he weighed in pretty heavy. He has been a fascinating figure from the get-go. Gut check. What he's saying, what you're saying, what the church is saying. Talk to me about that.
Sure. Well, the Holy Father, of course, has spoken very clearly, as you said, both in word and in deed, about opposing any military intervention in Syria. And it continues really what popes for decades, generations, centuries have said about warfare. It would be very unusual, I think, these days for any pope, any religious leader to encourage military intervention in a situation. So the Holy Father, Pope Francis, has spoken very clearly and very passionately, saying that we should not be involved in any more military intervention. As he said, violence begets violence and war begets war, and I think there's enough historical evidence to show that that's true. So he's leading the charge, I think, from a spiritual, a moral point of view against any additional warfare, any additional military intervention in Syria or anywhere else. I think the dilemma we have is that we also recognize that some really terrible things have happened in Syria and in other places too. But the challenge for us as Americans and as Christians is, when do we get involved? Do we ever find a situation where someone, a world leader, a dictator, is behaving so badly that it calls out for some kind of American involvement? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean military involvement, but at what point do we say enough is enough and someone has to take the high ground on this and try to do something to help the people who are suffering?
So when does that point come?
Well, that's what I don't know, and I think those who are in a position to have all the intelligence and background and so forth, it's a prudential judgment, a very difficult one.
The Pope doesn't get that intelligence, so he has to read from world accounts just like you and I do, and he's got to.
Although he might get more intelligence.
Well, tell me about
Remember, because it is the Vatican is an international state, and they have ambassadors, and they have contacts with various embassies, and they have people on the ground and so forth. And he's also, by the way, spoken out very clearly against the use of chemical weapons. That's part of his message that's been lost. So he's condemned very clearly the use of weapons of mass destruction and chemical weapons, but he's also said that there must be a way of approaching that beside imposing more violence, besides more warfare.
So what's your guess, Bishop? How high level do you think his intelligence is on this matter? I'm talking about military intelligence.
Sure. Well, I don't know. Obviously, I'm not involved in that circle.
I think people would be kind of interested when you bring that thing up and say, whoa, yeah, that's right. Pope's not just like the average parish priest. He's on the inside.
Well,
on a lot of
he's
world
on the
matters.
inside, and he's also head of state. And that's why we have an American ambassador to the Vatican and vice versa. There is a diplomatic channel there. Now, I don't know that the Holy Father has any special military information or anything like that, but certainly he has a sense of what's happening in these countries through the priests who are there, the bishops who are there, the nuncios who are there, contacts in the State Department. Ironically, right now, there is a little bit of a vacuum because at the moment we don't have an American ambassador to the Vatican. There's a lacuna there. They're in between appointments, but that's supposed to come very soon. Ken Hackett, who used to be in charge of the Catholic Relief Services, will be the new American ambassador to the Vatican, but right now he hasn't been appointed. So there might be something missing there, but the Holy Father certainly has information about conditions around the world, including in the Mideast, that we would have.
So here at home, you have not been shy to tell people what you think about social issues and the like. Are you going to, well, you're going to do it right here. I'm going to ask you to talk to the local congressional delegation as to how you think they should act here. Are you going to write one of your famous papers on this, or one of your editorials in the weekly? Or
no, what we have already done, of course, is the message we released last week that got some publicity and went to all of our pastors, all of our parishes, asking, in conjunction with what the Pope did over the weekend, the global prayer vigil, that all of our parishes in some way would certainly pray for this intention. We won't get involved in specific military or political strategy. I don't know that we're equipped to do that. But what we can do is follow the Pope's lead and say, let's pray for peace and justice in the Middle East and Syria and everywhere, and pray that our leaders will be inspired in such a way that they will have the wisdom they need to get out of this terrible mess. And it is a mess.
It is a mess. And I got to tell you, I think, and all you got to do is look at the polling data. I don't think I'm a rocket scientist to figure out that most of you are praying that we don't do this. At least that's what the numbers show us. In another matter that you have been very involved with, you may have joined the minority in a discussion on same-sex marriage. And I make this transition because I have limited time with the bishop. I'm going to try to cover as much as I can here this evening. That one smarted for you, didn't it?
Yeah, I was very, very disappointed. Frankly, I hoped for and prayed for better for our state, because I think it's a very bad development, and that's why we resisted it as strongly as we could. Yeah, I'm very disappointed in that, and I think a lot of people are.
The day after it became formal, now you need to understand, folks, while I want to see gay people in this community, in this country, get every single right that every one of us does. I think it was more than just a semantical argument, and that's my position. And when you are throwing banana peels at the television, you know that you can contact us and come here and talk to me about it any time. But the bishop and I are on the same page here, and a part, I have to admit, as a practicing Catholic, I get some of my instruction from him. But you know, I felt kind of empty, not angry, but empty, as if something had just changed that was so dramatic. In fact, you began to lament almost that you didn't think perhaps you did enough, even though you did plenty and you were getting a lot of heat for, in some folks' mind, doing too much.
Yeah, I did take a lot of heat, but that's part of the challenge of being a prophet. And in some ways, this is the prophetic role of the church, to challenge evil where we find it, where we see it, to challenge those in positions of political leadership. The church has a long history, even going back to the Old Testament, of prophets challenging the kings of Israel, and John the Baptist and Thomas More and many of the great apostles and prophets and saints throughout history have played that role of trying to challenge evil where we think it exists. And this is an important point, and I've said it 1,000 times, but sometimes it gets lost, sometimes perhaps on purpose. But in our opposition to same-sex marriage, never once did we intend to, or in fact, try to offend individual people who have same-sex attraction. This was not aimed at being offensive at individuals, but this was resisting a very strong political current. And what we think is a change in the equation here of the family unit and marriage as it's been defined in culture for millennia. And we think that will have consequences in days and years to come.
All right, well, there'll be plenty of time to talk about those consequences. Not enough time to break it all down here, but when we come back, I want to ask Bishop about a pretty profound thing that happened in North Providence, and then we got a little political conversation we have to have. Stay with us. Welcome back to State of Mind. You saw this about a month ago at this beautiful church in North Providence, where folks thought that they actually saw Mary on the cross. Is that Mary on the cross, Bishop Tobin?
Well, to some people it looks like Mary on the cross, and that's okay. As we said in our statement at the time, it's very unlikely that this is a result of any special divine intervention. Miracles like this don't happen very often. But there are many cases where God can use very natural signs and symbols to convey some kind of a message or an inspiration for people in their own hearts and minds, and that's okay. Some people look at clouds and will see sheep or something else in the clouds, but they're natural phenomena, and I think that's what happened here.
Well, you know, one of the things that I took from it was there are plenty of people who are missing something, and who are looking for an excuse to get back to God in
Sure.
any way that they possibly can, and I think that was the upside. The downside is I think people can get manipulated pretty easily, and so you have this bittersweet feeling of, isn't that nice that people are invigorated in their faith, at the same time maybe being played for a fool.
Sure. I saw a sign in another one of our parishes recently that said the real miracle is inside. Every time we celebrate Holy Mass and have the Holy Eucharist, there's a miracle that takes place there every day, several times a day. So if that image of a cross spoke to people in their hearts and their minds and devotion, that's terrific. And maybe it inspired them to have more devotion to our Blessed Mother, to get back to church, do some good deeds of charity and forgiveness. That's terrific.
Speaking of miracles, or tragedies, my mother, God rest her soul, if I had to tell her that the Catholic bishop went Republican, she would have, and gosh knows where she would have ended up with that one. I'm glad I didn't have to tell her. It was a hard time telling her I was one at one point. What happened? You announced at a gathering the other night that you re-registered as a Republican.
Yeah, well, first of all,
I'm sure that's not a 2-minute conversation, but that's all I got.
Well, we'll do it in 2 minutes, but for the sake of the record, first of all, even though I've changed political parties, I have not changed my football affiliation, even though after the Steelers yesterday, I'm tempted.
What about Faith Hill? Don't you want her back?
Well, I didn't see that part of it.
Oh, okay.
That's,
you don't watch the Open?
I saw part of it, but that's your area of
my
competence. Yes, you talk about faith. I can talk about faith.
Don't stall. What's this Republican thing all about?
Actually, that Republican thing got a lot more publicity than it deserved. It was meant to be a sidebar that became a headline, and I suppose that's understandable. That was an introduction to a 40-minute talk I gave about Catholic participation in the political process. And at the beginning, as the story will recall, I held up 2 documents. One was my new party affiliation, and one was my baptism certificate. which I found just in time for that meeting. And my point was my baptism certificate is far more important than political affiliation. My membership in the Democratic Party has never been terribly important for me, and candidly, my membership in the Republican Party isn't terribly important.
But something caused you to do it in a short period of time, 30 seconds or so. Tell me why you did it.
Right. Well, finally, and I suppose it was like water torture, one drop at a time. I really could no longer be structurally affiliated with a Democratic Party that has as part of its platform a very zealous promotion of abortion, a very zealous promotion of contraception, a very avid promotion of gay culture. I just couldn't do it anymore, so I just reached a point where I said, in good conscience, I need to make a change.
Feel good about it?
I do. Not that it's a big deal. I feel better about my baptism.
Did you feel good about the attention?
I felt good, at least at, I think, a very good conversation I had at the Young Republicans.
Well, I feel good about you coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for the
always.
invitation
Whether
again.
it's the radio or the TV,
great.
it's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
When we come back, I'll tell you how you can articulate your state of mind on mine. Stay with us. Since this is our inaugural effort, I have none of your feedback, but I'm guessing by tomorrow night that's going to change. Here's how you get in touch with the broadcast to react to anything that you've already seen or whatever happens to be on your state of mind. Telephone number is 401-228-1886. stateofmind@myRITV.com is the email. And of course, you can tweet at me and you can Facebook me and all that. You know, the social media thing is the way we do it now. But we love the voicemail, and you don't even have to be nice. I mean, lay it on me, baby. We'll hear what you have to say. There's plenty of opportunity for you to react, and we'll pick the best ones of the night. So either on voicemail or on the email or through the social media, tell me what is on your state of mind. Again, I'm honored by your presence. We'll be here right back tomorrow night on myRITV at 7:30. I'm Dan Yorke. Thanks for joining My State of Mind. Good night.